All right. It's been a while here, guys. I can see some people are already. You know what? Just let me know in the chat if you can hear me. And this is basically what we covered last week. Let me see. I need to change the layout so that you guys can see this clearly. All right, I think this is fine. Okay. Yeah. So, guys, let me know if you can. Let me know if you can see my screen. If you can hear me, drop a message in the chat. We're already looking at React. We're already covering React. So we did a couple of things last week. Um, yeah, and of course, I want everyone to, follow up with, the session. So if you were not in the last class and you probably don't understand what you're seeing on the screen, also let me know in the chat so I can quickly, cover some of the things we've actually, mentioned, some of the things we've actually taught in class. I'll just do like a quick revision, but I need to understand, you know, from the number of people watching on this specific call, I need to understand what you guys are familiar with, and if you were in the last class, let me see, that's from Okolo Chinemerem. Okay, so if you're in the last class and you're part of the session where we created this simple web page that you can see on my screen, go ahead and let me know. Let's try to put this on the same screen. Okay. So we also shared the code base, I remember. So give me a second. Let's take a look at the code base. Let's take a look at the repository first off. Zoom in on my screen. Okay. So 300 dev days, I think that is React. And we have simple React blog, which was exactly what we worked on. So git remote show origin. Yeah, so I remember I had shared this repository. Okay, so I have the repository right here. Okay, someone said yes, please. Can you make a quick revision? Okay, okay. All right, so I'll do a quick revision before we proceed. But yeah, so just in case you don't have the link to this repository, I would share that in the, yeah, let's go back one step. I think this is probably the wrong, let's see. Oh yeah, okay, so this is the right one. Yeah. So as you can see, we have React, simple React blog right here. So you just have to click on that. Okay, and you will see the code base. But let me share the link in the chat. I'll share the link in the chat. Let's see. I wasn't in the class. I see. Okay. Okay, so if I drop the link in the chat here, I'm sure it might not be clickable, but you can just copy the URL and open it up on your browser. Okay. Yeah, so for those of you that were not in class, so what we actually covered was, the fundamentals of, React, including how to create your new React project, understanding the folder structure, as well as, or understanding the file structure, basically understanding how to, set up your components, right? We learned how to, create the components we have here, as well as, knowing how to set up like your CSS, your CSS files and linking them to your project as well. Some of this pattern would be, you discover that they are similar to what you have learned already in Vue, right? But let's just go ahead and cover this one more time. So when you want to set up your React project, let's clear this. Let's just move to our desktop. All you have to do, maybe we can move into this folder, the React folder. Yeah. So all you have to do is to use the npx, create React app. And by the way, this is for we're using this style because we're simply using the create React app, utility. There are different ways to actually scaffold your React application, depending on I mean, you can be using the meta framework such as Next.js, right? That would have a different way, you have a different way to create your application if you're using Next.js. But when working with Create React app, This is the base way to create your new application. And of course, you can check out the Create React App website. I think I shared that shared it that day. So I think it's createreactapp.dev. So create-react-app.dev. So I'm going to also share this in the chat. Yes, yeah, you can go ahead and fork the code. So favor Uchechukwu, yes, you can do that. This is the link, right? If you're visiting Create React App, and of course, if you click on Get Started, you also get to see, the instruction, the command that I'm using from my end as well. npx create React App, then my app, which is the name of the application, right? So this can be Mav blog or Mav website or Mav portfolio. It can be anything, any name you prefer to use. But this is how you use the command, right? So when you run this command, it's going to create your application. It's going to scaffold that application, and then you have to navigate into the directory, and you run npm start to basically run your application, right? And of course, you can also run npm install if you want to install other packages. Okay, if you want to install other packages, um, yeah, yeah, okay. So let's see what we have here. By the way, you can also check out the React website itself. You can check out the documentation. The best way to learn any framework is always checking out is by checking out the API reference, right? Or the documentation. So this is the best way to learn any framework. What we do here in class is to ensure that you understand some of the concepts that you would find here that might relatively be difficult for you to comprehend. Okay, so we're basically following the same standard here, right? So take a look at the API reference, check out the click on learn, and use the documentation, follow the example applications that they've built, right? And of course, you can use the documentation is quite easy to understand. Click on describing the UI, and you will find more details in there. So let's click on this. It's taking some time to actually load. Okay, that's quite slow. I believe it's my network, by the way. So let's see. Yeah, I believe it's my network. Okay, so check it out, and if you don't have this link, I will also share. Yeah, I'll share this with you in the chat as well. All right. Okay, so I think we can close this once for now. Um, So back to the terminal. So you simply run npx, npx create React app, and I can call this Maps blog, right, or Maps website or something, and we'll have that we'll have create React app set up our new project for us, right? So this will take a while, of course, depending on your network. Okay, so I would always recommend having good network connectivity, right? So yes, you need to be connected to the internet if you want, to set up your new application. Um, we already have an app that we'll be using today, so I don't really need to use this. But I just wanted to see what like a fresh, folder would look like, a fresh project, right? That have not been altered, so I can also explain, some of the parts of this application of this code, right? For those of you that were not in the previous class, by the way, try to show up, so that we don't have to always go back. And of course, I wouldn't be doing a deep dive. I'll just try to run through what the folder structure looks like. So if you want like a more comprehensive explanation, maybe you can visit the last video session that was. I think it was also streamed to YouTube, so you can check out some of the live streams. Someone is asking, are we going to run it on our Git Bash terminal or VS Code? Either of them is fine, right? Either of them is fine. I mean, so long it's a terminal, you can run your command there. Just ensure that you know the folder or directory that you're creating your application in, so that you can simply, open that particular directory in your code editor, whether it's VS Code, Atom, or Sublime, whichever code editor you prefer to use. Okay, hope that makes sense. I What's your name? New movies advert TV. All right. Okay, so this is taking some time to install, but maybe I can just cancel this, and I'll proceed to explain with the application that we already have set up here. Okay, so when you actually set up your application, you don't have this components folder. Maybe I can just give me a second. Let me see. Sure, I should be able to. Okay, I should be able to delete this. Right, copy. Okay, create a new application here. Let's just say maps blog. Oh, I already have something like that here. Oh, all right. So let's take this off and paste this here. Okay, so I just want to show you what that folder structure would look like, right? So let's open this up in VS Code. Right. So you can get to see what this looks like. I'm going to zoom in on my screen so that this can be more visible to you. All right, so you take a look at this. We have the public folder and we have the source folder. So the public folder or directory and the source directory. All right, and then we have this is Git ignore because I'm currently using Git, right? So this would basically set some of the items that you will not you won't like to push to GitHub. For example, node modules you don't want to push that to GitHub. If you take a look at the package.json, this basically creates that structure for your project description alongside some of the installations, right? Some of the packages that you're using in your project. So we have the React app, right? So check. Let's see. Okay, we have the React app. That is the main thing we're actually using here. That is this dependencies React, the React DOM. So these are the defaults, right? We have not installed any additional dependency apart from the defaults, right? Some of the testing libraries here, such as Jest. Okay, then we also have the scripts. So these are the scripts that you run to, build or start your application, test your application as well. So we have some of those scripts right here. Okay, and the package lock.json is just a way to, you know, it's just a way to ensure that the items being installed, of course, are not you're probably not installing like the wrong version. So this can be a way to protect the installation candidates that are going into your application, right? Of course, also to make sure that when you're performing an installation, if you have simultaneous installation, this can also help ensure that the installations are running smoothly, right? Especially when you're doing multiple installations from different locations, right? Yeah, multiple package installations. So package lock, it's something that you don't create yourself, of course. When you're performing installations, this is generated, right, and maintained. If you delete this, right, disappears after a while. So in the public directory, you have your five icon. The five icon is basically, that icon, this icon you see right here. You can see this on my screen. Can I zoom in? You see. Okay, so I don't know how visible this is on your end, right? But I'm trying to zoom in from here. So this icon is basically your five icon. I'm sure you have tried to do something like that in your, regular um, HTML, CSS, code base. Okay, so we have the index.html right here, and our React application is going to be rendered, right inside this root div, right? So of course I've explained this as well, when we were looking at Vue, right? We explained how you mount your Vue application within that app, that ID with app. In this case, we have something similar. Your application will be mounted on root, and I'll show you how that works within the source directory shortly. We have some of the default, logo. This is basically part of the default items that came with the scaffold, right? When we created the project, we have the manifest.json file and then the robot.txt file, basically used by crawlers, right? When crawling your web page. But let's pay attention to the source directory, for a minute, okay? We have the assets folder, and this is something that we created. Ideally, you don't get to see some of these directories, right? The structure doesn't come this way. We set this up. We created the assets folder. We created the components directory as well, or the components folder. And within the assets folder, we're using this to store some of these assets, such as the CSS files, the images, right? Yeah, in this case, the Burger King image that you saw on my browser, right? Okay. So we also have, yeah, so the components folder, we also created the components folder to manage our components, okay? And we have the blog component, for example, right? This was a very simple component that we had created the other day. I would get to explain some of these things as well. The blog list, right? So we basically use this, to list out, I would say to list the items that would, appear within the blog, right? So when we make a call to an API and we fetch those blogs, we then render the items or the blog title, description, right? We render those stuff um, within, of course, within the blog list, but we have to basically attach those, values on the blog, right? Because the blog itself is a component, and the blog list would basically be a container that holds, lots of blogs. All right. So this is more like a child component, and this is the parent component. Okay. We also have the footer. We have the footer component, which is what you're seeing right here. Um, yeah, and you see we decided to style this separately. Of course, you can choose to write your style right here within the component, but I always prefer to do it this way. To have our style separated so we can manage it independently, right? I would prefer to take off this position thing here, but we'll get to that. All right, we'll get to that. So you see, we also have the nav bar. So this is the nav bar with its own style, in the navbar.css file, which is what we also have here. This is the nav bar styling. Okay, quite simple. But the idea is the way we're able to actually keep these items clean and separate. Okay, and what else do we have? Let's see. All right, so we have the app.css. So the app.css is basically the styling that we use against the app.js file. So the app.js file is a component on its own, but we are basically using that to wrap other components, right? So the app.js file, let's see what we have in here. We have the profile image, we have the form.css. I don't know why we have the form.css. I think primarily for, yeah, so it's basically because of the buttons. So we have the button style right here, okay? And we also have those other components that we have created, like the navbar, the footer, right, and the block component as well, as I had mentioned earlier. So you see we have the block component right there. Let's see, did we use the blog lists? I doubt if we used the blog lists. Okay, so I don't think we used the blog list here. So what you're seeing here basically is our React application. Let me zoom out a bit so you can also I see this clearly. Okay, all right, so we have some of those imports, right? Importing the static items, right? And then we have the components, also imported here. Okay, so we have we have what we call use states. We import use states from React, and we basically use state this use state function to manage, I would say we use that to manage, our variables. We use that to manage, even our functions as well. But it's basically used to manage some of the variables, and we call them states, right, that we have within our code. So for example, the company name, which is Burger King, right? So if you look at this, you see we have Burger King, that's its company name, okay? And I would run this and show you how it works, right? So you see we have we have this stored statically, and then we're using use state here to manage that variable so that we can make it dynamic when we choose to change the value, right? So we can choose to change the value. Name currently says marvelous. Within our code base, we can set name to something else, and it would it would react. Okay, it would react to that change. We also have this function, right? Simple click. This is a function based on the trigger on our button here. So you see we have the simple click, and we have the click here for another magic. So basically that is a different function, and that function is this, right? This is what is being triggered, right? So the button was clicked by name. So what happens is when I click on this, you see it says by name, but the name you're seeing here is basically Ella and Amaka, right? So the name is different from the name that we had set initially, which was Marvelous, right? And the reason for that is because we had changed that name, right here in our code. So when we call this, we pass in new names, right? And of course, I would get to run this and do more explanations as well. All right. So within the return function here, you see we have our templates, right? This is the way you basically render. This is how you render these items on your browser, right? So you have to return the items to be rendered. Okay. So what you're seeing here is basically JavaScript. Okay. We call it JSX, and we render this right here on the browser on the DOM. All right. So I'm going to run this code so we can also explain some of the things I have mentioned right now. You can see it in action before we move on to discuss uh, what I want us to discuss today, which is use effect, a different hook in React as well. That is what we're going to be covering today. Yeah, so let's go ahead and run this. Go back to the terminal. I'll simply say npm. Let's just make sure we're in the right location. So simple React blog. Okay, npm start. So this will start our application, right? Okay, so this is currently starting. It's going to refresh this page. So this is running right now. Let's see what we have. Okay, all right, so this is what we have right now. First off, I don't like the fact that this is fixed, right? The footer is fixed. So I want to start by changing that. Remember, I mentioned we have the footer component right here, but then our style is in a different file. So we can simply point to that file and take it off. We don't want this to be fixed anymore. So we can go back to the browser, and what you see is that this is no longer fixed, right? So you see, I can literally move this around. It's no longer fixed. Okay. All right. So I would prefer to, have this in a different screen so that navigating from the code to the browser would be easier for us. Okay. So let's zoom out a bit on this. Okay, that makes sense. All right. So this is no longer fixed, right? And probably don't need to set that width I have there. So it's already filled, right? So I can add more items and, scrolling becomes easier for me. Something you can do, right, is also maybe set this to absolute and, have your bottom position, set. But what you'll notice from here is that we then need to set our width to 100%, right? So we can have it fill that page. Okay. All right, that makes sense. Let's go back into the app.js so we can actually see what is going on here. All right. So as I mentioned earlier, the app.js is where we end up, using some of the components we have created in this, example project, right? The app.js file itself will be mounted in the index.js. So this is the index.js file that actually contains, the entire wrapper, for React. So you see we have import React from React. We also import React DOM right here. Okay. Then at this point, we import that app.js file that I was explaining, the various sections that we had created in the code. We actually import the file here, import app from app.js, right? So you can say app.js or you can just say app, which is fine. Okay. So you should also pay attention to the path, right? So this is basically on the same level in terms of the path. We don't need to, do more we don't need to go into nested folders because it's right here on the same path with the index.js file, right? And you see we then render this right here by calling the components, the base components, right? So we basically put this here, and this is what is rendered to the root. So you can see that root is equals React dom.create root, and it says document.get element by ID root, right? Which is exactly what you are seeing inside the public folder, inside the index.html file root. Okay, so everything that we have written within the app within the app components, including all the nested, components, will eventually be rendered within this root. So it will be rendered in between this place, right? So our React application will be rendered here. Okay, so let's just go back into that index.js. Okay, so we say react dom.create root document.get element by id roots. That becomes our root. So when we say root.render, we render everything that we have within the app components. And of course, the app component itself also renders other components such as the title, such as the navigation, the footer, and the blog components. Okay. Hope that makes sense. I want you to tell me if this was so complex for you to understand. Let me know in the chat before I proceed to the next thing. If you have any questions, go ahead and drop those questions so that we can take them before we um, probably do a bit of explainer on this code again. If you have any questions, guys, drop your question in the chat. If this was clear to you, also let me know in the chat. Okay, I'll give you 2 minutes to do that. Please let me know in the chat if you have any questions. All right, so you have 2 minutes to do that. I'm actually waiting for more messages. I want to know if this was very complex for you to understand or if the explanation made it easier for you to understand. So let me know in the chat, okay? I need more responses, okay? I need more responses to the chat so that, I'll be sure the amounts of people that are actually following up with us. So, yeah, let me know if it was complex. Someone is asking, this is from Michael Okosun. What happens if okay, what happens if there are other, okay, there's another component inside the render? Okay, yeah, that's an interesting question. So let me come back to this. Let me see. I think what I get from your question, you're asking that what happens if there's another component inside the render here. So ideally, you should have one component, right? But if you are referring to like rendering multiple components, just like we have done here outside of that render function, then yes, that works perfectly here, right? So it's actually better that you have one base item. In fact, I don't even recommend you come here. You don't have to touch anything here. You're building your application. Just focus on the app.js file and nest all the necessary components here, right? Just like we have the navbar and we have any other component that appears here, such as the footer and the blog, right? Okay, so Michael, how can I join this meeting using Zoho? Actually, we are not using Zoho today. I mean, we would have loved to, but it seems like we get the best experience right here on YouTube, looking at the feedback we got from the last class, which is why we're streaming to YouTube directly today without leveraging Zoho. Okay. Um, yeah, I mean, the main idea of using Zoho initially was to have, a way for you guys to unmute yourself and ask questions, right? To keep it conversational. But I don't think the experience was good for everyone that joined the call the last time. So, yeah. Someone is saying, is it compulsory to use JSX or one can use JS also? Yeah, so basically you can use JS also if you're referring to the extension, right? You see, this is blog.js, right? And it can also be blog.jsx. Okay, so it's not compulsory, right, to name your file with JSX, right? So you can also use JS. But if you're referring to the structure or the way we write the code, the way we write our React code, you have to follow the structure here. Ideally, without wanting to go with the function pattern when creating your when creating your components, right? There's a different pattern to use, but I mean, almost everybody prefer to go with this route, right? Using this JSS route rather than wanting to, create a class and set up some of these templates. Maybe I would explain how the other pattern works in one of our sessions, but this is more like the go-to, option. And this is also my recommendation. It's easier if you actually use, the function. Okay. So that is for Emmanuel. All right, so I don't think I'm getting more questions, right? So I believe this is probably clear to most of you on the call. If you have questions, do well to drop your questions in the chat. Let us come back into let's see, maybe I can start with this. So first, you are seeing that I have to import the navbar.css, file, right? So this is our style, okay? And then, we're able to create, the component. We call that component navbar, and then we also export that component with export default navbar, okay? Exporting the components, gives you the ability to import, this particular, component in a different file, okay? So you have to export so that you can import in a different file. Okay, so these are basically links, right? Top universe link and the both click link, right? These are just variables, and the point is we are creating it this way, so we can simply use it in our code using these curly braces, right? So we can simply bring in variable items into our HTML or into our templates, right? So we can bring this into our templates. Now, if you take a look at this, you will realize one thing. Whatever you write in here is basically, JavaScript, right? It's regarded as JavaScript, which is why you don't use the regular class attributes, right? You see, we're not using the regular class attributes, we're using class name, right? Because using the class attributes is not going to work in here. Of course, remember, we also have the class, we have class, right, for writing actual class in JavaScript. So that is the main reason why you can't use the class here. Instead, you use class name, and this makes it understand that we're trying to refer to the CSS style, right? So that CSS style is then going to be gotten from the CSS file that we have imported here. So you see, we have navbar. So if I check the CSS file, you will get to see that navbar style, right? I'm sure you can see that. Okay. All right. So I think this is clear already. So the link we have in here is what is then rendered into this link, right? As yeah, so which means you can change this here and to also reflect the value that's able to sit inside this place. Okay, same applies to the both click link. All right. So let us close this component and just go back into the app.js component. All right, so this is the app.js components. You see, we also started with a function app, and if you take a close look at this, you see we can export app as well. So the functions we created should also have like an export, and the footer we just finished describing. You see that you are able to actually import the footer. You are able to import the navbar as well, right? You can import your navbar this way. So you can basically import your components this way, right? Or you can import this way. You just have to use the shorthand here by simply closing it, right here within a single tag, right? So you don't have to do double tag, but yeah, I mean, if you want to render or put some items in between here, you can, but you know, yeah, I mean, any of this pattern would work, right? Any pattern would work. Ideally, if you have what we call slots, but we're not going to describe what slots are actually for now, right? So this is basically how you import your components, and your components can sit with your other template code. Okay, just like we have the image, the source, and the source. We're basically bringing in the profile image, which we had imported that already. Import profile image from this. So by the time you put that as the source, it's simply going to reference the link that you have here within your assets directory. Hope that makes sense. Okay. And we also have the p tag. We have okay. So this is basically how you can also choose to create a style within your component, right? Within your React component, you can choose to write your style inside your React component. But remember that this is JavaScript. Okay. So when you choose to write a style in here, you have to use a specific pattern that makes it work. So you see what we did here. We said style, and we say style equals, you have to open the braces, right, twice in order to be able to, basically, I would say once, and then you have your style written in here. Okay, so you have your style written inside, the second braces that we have here. Okay, so this is our style basically. All right, so this is our style. So now you see we have display, flex, justify content, center. And if you also look at the way we write the CSS, you see it's different from the way you actually write your CSS currently. We use the the camel case standard rather than using the hyphen. Okay, so if you have items where you need to actually use hyphen in regular CSS, when you're writing that style within React, you don't use the hyphen. Instead, you use the you use a capitalized form of the second item. So, for example, justify content, the second item, which is content, starts with capital letter C and the hyphen is removed. So, same way you apply this as well for background image, right? Justify content, you align items, place items, you have to follow similar standard. Okay, when you are, writing your style right inside the components like this. Okay, so you see, we also did the same thing here, button style, we have color white, and then we have background color black. Okay, so we're doing it here, and we're just trying to show you, how you basically do this styling within React. Okay, and if you are applying a class, you have to go with class name, as mentioned, right? So we have button primary. So this is based on, the classes that we have specified inside the form.css file. Okay. All right. So how do you perform actions and then triggers? So you see, we have on click. Okay. So we have on click. If you're writing view, you probably want to do at click or v on click. But right here, we just have on click, and we have to call the function that we are click that we want to basically trigger. Okay. That function is called simple click. So we can check out that function right here. You see, the function is also within the React function that we have created, which is the base app. All right, so you see we have those functions in here. This is the simple click function. It's an arrow function, and we just have a simple response here. It's an alert, right? It's a simple alert that just says this button was clicked, right? So the reason why we're able to call this, directly within the onClick, just like this, is because we're not passing any arguments whatsoever to the function. Okay. Now, for an example where you need to pass an argument to the function, you simply have to say onClick, and you then have to create another arrow function within that onClick, right? You're doing that so that by the time you call, by the time you put the parentheses, it doesn't trigger automatically. So the way we have on click with simple click, if we decide to put in the parentheses this way, that shows we are actually trying to trigger a function. When you run this code, even without clicking on that button, it triggers itself automatically. So you don't want to do this, right? If you have scenarios where you need to pass in parameters or arguments to the function, you have to go with this pattern. So you basically put in the arrow function in there before you call the function alongside the parameters that you're passing in. Okay, so this is another simple click, which is a function. So we have that function right here, and we're expecting a name. Okay, so in our example, we passed in Ella and the marker as a name, but I can simply pass in Mav, for example. So let's save that. So if I save, which is exactly what I just did, let's go back into this application. I am going to click on this, and you see, oh, we still have Ella and Amaka. So let's make sure that that is saved. Let's refresh. Let's refresh this first. Okay, let's click on that again. So now you see we have the button was clicked by Mav because we have changed the value to Mav, right? So I can simply say to John, let's save that. Let's come back here and let's try to run this again. So you see the button was clicked by John. Okay, so that is how you work with event triggers, right? In the React, okay, especially using the onClick trigger. All right, so the onClick event handler. This is how you use it if you're trying to trigger functions without passing parameters or arguments. When you're passing arguments, you have to basically pass this into an arrow function, okay, before you call the function itself. All right, hope that makes sense. This is a very simple, example. And if you probably need to go through this one more time, follow the link that was shared with you, right, to the GitHub repository, and you will find the code base, so you can take your time, to revise and try to understand what we have done inside these files. Okay, so quick one. I don't want to take too much of our time. I actually wanted us to dive into working with, use effects. Use effect is basically how we are going to, um, make calls or basically trigger, call some functions or perform some actions when our page just finished loading. Okay, when that particular page finished loading. So what I'm going to do right now is let's check out the components. Let's check out the blog. Let's see. So let's check out the block component. What I'm going to do in the block component is probably change, the way we what we're going to do is we're going to fetch some hold on a bit, let's see. We're going to fetch some blocks from JSON placeholder. Okay, placeholder. So I believe we have done this several times, so we have to fetch blocks, right, from JSON placeholder. Probably when we're learning, JavaScript and even Vue, we did this. Okay, so this time around, we're also going to do something similar within our React application. Okay, so first I'm going to create a block card. I'm going to create a block card. I'm going to do basic styling within that block card before I create the block component itself again, right? And we are going to fetch the blocks from JSON placeholder. So let's just take off the whole thing, right? Which means we're simply going to have an error on this page because of course we are trying to render that component, but it has nothing in the component. So that basically gave us that error. If I bring this back, you see the error is gone. If I take it off, we have that error again, right? So let's go ahead and import use state and let's see, we're going to import use state and use effects, right? So I'm simply going to take this off. Let's take this off for now. Okay, so I'm just going to say we have use states and we have use effects. Okay, from React. So let's start by setting up our block card, right? So we're going to say the block card. We need to pass in some props. So of course, if you followed up with a Vue class, you know what props are. We're going to be able to call this component and pass in the values in the props, right? So the props values here would include title and body. So the title and the body, because that is all we are going to get from. I mean that's the major data we can work with when we call the JSON placeholder endpoints, right? So this is a component that would simply render that block. So let's just do an inline styling here. So we're going to have let's say border, yeah. So we're going to have a border of 1px solid black, and this should be in single quotes like this, right? So we're going to have a simple padding here. Let's just have a padding of 10px, and we are going to have margins. So let's see, we can set the margin of also. Let's just use 10px as well. So this is not going to be so beautiful, but the point is just to be able to have that demarcation, that border, right, across each blog items. Okay, so this is fine. We're going to pass in maybe h2 and the p tag for the body. So this would be the body of the blog, more like the description, and this would be the title, right, of that blog. So these are the props, and this is how we are going to use the props, right? Okay, so let's see if we're missing something. I have a feeling that we are missing. So this guy, all right, what are we missing here? I think we forgot something. We forgot to include the return, yeah, correct? So we forgot to include the return, and the return basically use the braces just like this. Okay, so we are going to close this up. Good. So now we have the block card component. Next, we're going to create the block component itself. Now, remember that the block card component can be in a different file. So let's just keep this in the same file for now. So this is the next component that we have to create, but this component does not expect a prop, right? So we're going to render the block card for each block item that we fetch on JSON placeholder. We're going to render that into the block component here. Okay. So within the block components, let's just create the posts. So now we are basically using set post, and this is going to be our use state for posts. So by default, we don't have any posts. So let's keep it as null. The expectation is an array of objects. So let's just keep an empty array there that says we don't have any item in here for now. So we also have const, and we're going to set some, states if it's loading or if it has stopped loading. So we can use set loading as a way to update the loading status. And we would also use state. So for now, by default, it's true. So by default, it is loading, right? So when it stops loading, we can set that to false. And I'll show you how this works shortly. Remember, we also need to export the blog. So I'm simply going to include that export option for now, export default blog, right? So this is going to export that blog, at least so we can stop having this error. So now we don't have the error, and we don't have any item because we're not fetching any blog just yet, okay? Next, what I want us to do, maybe if we have an error, we can actually have a way to capture that error or to track that error. So we can create this if we have an error or if we need to set an error, right? This is more like a standard way, you're going to find a lot of React developers, do things this way. So if you have an error within your template, you can just specify set error to this, and error will be displayed somewhere with some style, maybe in red, okay? But yeah, I mean, you're pretty much going to see this standard for setting your loading spinner if you have one, or displaying error, right? And sometimes you also have an option for even displaying success. But then some other times you see the developers use some libraries, right? Libraries like post notifications, and we'll get to the point where you see how to use those libraries as well. Okay, so at this point, we need to bring in use effect because this is where we are going to set, what happens when our application loads for the first time, right? So what exactly are we going to do? We're going to fetch, an item, or we're going to fetch the list of items from the JSON placeholder web page. So this is exactly what we need, but not to do's, right? We need the option for posts, which is this, right? So let's click on that, and you're going to see all the posts appear here. So let's just copy this. Okay, let's go back to our code. So this is exactly what we're going to fetch. Okay, and we can simply say the then. The then is simply saying, okay, if we get the post, right, what happens, right? So if we get the post, we're going to have the post within a response, and what we can do is, render the items, right? Of course, if the response is okay or not, you need to keep track of that as well because the response can be like a negative response, right? If something is not maybe you have an error message coming back as a response. So you can simply track this by saying if the response is not okay, right? So this is what we're doing now. We're saying if the response is not okay, let's just throw an error, right? And the error should just tell us failed to fetch data. Now, this error that we are throwing, remember, you have to put this is a string. This error that we are throwing would then take us to another section where we can say, dot catch, right? So let's move this to dot catch, okay? And if we have an error or if we have thrown an error here, it's going to basically come in here and then render that particular error, right? So we can say set error, and we can just capture the error.message. We can say set loading because we already have loading as true. So at this point we can stop loading, right? So set loading is simply going to capture whatever value that loading has, and then we're going to set that particular value to be false, right? So for now, we're only checking the case if this is not okay. The response we get is not okay. That's what we're simply capturing here, right? And of course, we can even choose to say return the response of JSON. I mean, maybe you probably want to do some additional work with this, which is not very compulsory at this point. But what I want us to do now is to capture if this particular data is fine, what do we do? Right? So we can actually have another dot then, and within this dot then, we capture the data for real. So this is the data that we are going to be working with if all is, if everything is fine. So we're going to set the post, which is the data that we have fetched. So the data that you're seeing on our browser, everything you see right here, I think about 100 of them, is then going to be added into this data variable, right? And we can simply store all those items inside posts because we're expecting to have an array of objects, just like what we have here. This is an array of objects. If you take a look at that, you see it's an array of objects. Okay, so we can simply say set post, right? And you can just pass in the data. Okay, so if this is valid and we're able to get the feedback or the response from here, we're going to set that as data inside posts using the set post command. All right. Okay. So now this is simply how we perform that fetch, right? We're able to fetch, we're able to fetch the items. I think the JSON should actually carry this. Yeah, that's correct. Is it? We can verify that. This is a bit confusing. I can't really, not very sure, but let me see if I have an error. Uh, Okay, so I don't have an error. Okay, so I think this is fine. All right, so what is happening here is we're simply going to check if there's an error. If this is not okay, we just throw an error, and this error that we throw is then going to present, this set error, right? It's going to simply carry us down to the catch section here, and we can simply grab the error from here and throw the error.message, which is the exact message we've described here. Okay, so when you throw an error, this is the message, and the message is what we have captured here, and we also set loading to false, right? So same way, if we have set the post here, we don't need to try to load anymore, so we can simply say set loading to false as well, because we don't need to load anymore. We have captured the data we are expecting to have, right? So now the data that we have captured here is what we then need to actually present, right, in the template. But just to verify that we're actually capturing this data, I am going to say console.log data. So let us check the console now to see if we are actually getting that data that we have captured. So let's go to console. All right. So let's go to the console. I think I saw the data. Let's clear this and let's reload this page. So I'm going to clear this. I have a lot of things happening here. So from what I can see, this is being called several times, right? So we need to make sure that this is being called only once. So this is being called several times because we did not handle that case of actually wanting this to be called once, right? So if you want this to be called once, all you need to do right here is to pass in this empty array. Let's see. Yeah, this empty array. This is basically going to allow this to be called once. So I can put a comment here. So I would say allow use effects to be called once. Okay, let's save that. Let's go back to the browser. Let's clear this. So let's refresh this page now. Let's see if that is going to be called once. Okay, so let's see what happens here. All right, so this actually loaded, I think, did this load twice? Let's verify. Do I have console.log twice somewhere? Let's see. Nope, we only have that happening once, console.log data. Let me take this off for now. Let's see what happens here again. Let's refresh. I think for some reasons, this is being rendered twice, I believe. Let's save this. Oh, okay, that's happening once. Okay, that's fine. So we have this, the use effect called once this time around, and we have 100 items, printed to the console. So at least we're sure that we're getting the data, right? We're getting the actual data. If this fails, right? If I remove the S from there, this basically says not found, right? Which means at this point, it actually, throws that error. So we can also check console.log error.message. Let's track this to see if the error is actually being captured. As you can see, the error is also being captured if it fails to actually fetch that data. Okay, and of course, it fails to fetch the data because I have taken off the S from here, and there's nothing like this endpoint is not valid. It actually needs to have that S, right? Because it's posts, not posts. Okay, so now this works perfectly. Let's go ahead and render this data on the DOM. Okay, so in order to render this data on the DOM, this is the point where we start writing some template code. The first thing I'm going to do is to simply say if loading, right? Because we're trying to track if that's actually loading. Return. So we return a template here with div, and we can simply say loading, right? Let's add some dots there to show that this is actually loading. Okay, so this is what we're going to return if it's still loading. I go back to the browser and I refresh. So let's refresh. You see, it shows loading for a while and it goes off. Let's do that again. So it shows loading for a while and then it goes off. That shows that it was loading, it was trying to fetch the data, and after fetching the data, it goes off completely because you are only trying to show this if it is still loading, right? So if it is no longer loading and we have set the post and we have stopped loading to false, it automatically goes off. So the next thing we can do is to have a different if statement here that we can use to capture. Maybe we can capture if there's an error, right? So if there's an error, please just go ahead and render that error. So I can say error, and we can have error right here. Okay. Of course, we can also do some styling. Remember the same way we did some styling here. So we can just do the same styling here. What we just have to track this time around is color because we can simply say background, right? And our background can be red. Okay, so let's put the background as red. Yeah, so that is a comma, by the way. Not yeah. So let's go ahead to say the color. Okay, so the color has to be white. Okay, and of course you can add like maybe border, right? Maybe border radius. Okay, and border radius can use 8px. So let's use 8px just like this. Let's add some padding. Let's do 10px. Okay, so I believe this is fine. If we have an error, that error will be displayed. So let's try to, mimic that error again. I'm going to take off that S. So this time around, we will basically, see that error show up. So now you see we have an error. It says failed to fetch data, right? So that is the error that we get. Okay. And of course, you can also set the width. I'm not going to do that here. Let's not spend too much time trying to achieve a lot of fancy designs. So if I go back and I fix that, we are no longer going to see that error, right? So that error would, go off. Let's refresh this page first, see what we have. So now you see we don't have that error because we are calling the right endpoint. Okay. So now it's time for us to actually render the blog items itself. So we can just come down here. Let's go ahead and return a div. Okay, and within this div, we're simply going to first put in h1. So let's just call this our blog post or all blog posts. Okay, and this is the point where we now have to do some mapping, right? What are we mapping against? We're mapping against the posts because we have set posts already with all the data. So it means we have 100 posts, inside the posts, the post variable right here. So we can map we can simply say post dot map, and what we can do right now is to map each post inside the post inside the post array, right? You can map each post inside the post array. So right here we simply, let's see, this is what we need to do. So yeah, so we simply need to render the block card in here. So I'm going to say block card. That is the block card that we had created here. Okay, so we need to render the block card. So we can actually render the block card with a key, but I really want to show you. Sometimes, we can use the index. Each item has an index. Each item has a position, right? So sometimes we use that, as the index, but we can also use an ID if the ID comes with the contents that was fetched from the backend or from the server, right? Basically, remember we have the title. If you take a look at this again for the props, these are the props right now, the title and the body. So we can actually pass in that title. And of course, that title will be post.title, right? Because what we are getting from here, remember what we are getting from here, each post has ID, title, and body, right? So which means we're on the right track when it comes to our code. This is the title, this is the right title, and then the body would be the post.body, right? So that is the body. We can close this particular item, but it also makes sense that we include a key, as I mentioned earlier. A key is a way for React to identify each item that was rendered, especially from a loop like this. Okay, we loop through the posts, and render each post. Okay, so for the key, we can actually decide to use the post.id, just like what we have seen right here on the blog that was returned. Each blog has an ID, 1, 2, 3, 4. So the key has to be unique, right? So which means each item is going to have a unique key. And now this is the blog that we have rendered on our page. Well, unfortunately, our footer was, this is actually messed up, which means I wrote a messy CSS, style. So we can fix that. What did I do exactly? I was thinking this is how position, blah blah blah, but yeah, that is an obvious mistake because I believe we're using absolute here. Let us see what app.css actually has for. What do we have for the heights? Some weird reasons I can't find the base height for this, which is weird, right? I can't find the base height. Let's see. What do we have for the height? PH. I don't know. Does that make sense? Okay. What if I do position relative? Since that item, yeah, position relative actually works. So it pushes the footer down to the end. Okay. All right. So here we go. We are using use effect to render this immediately. We load the page. I refresh again. We are going to start off with loading. Let's see what happened there. Refresh one more time. Okay, so I mean that is loaded, real quick. Probably too fast. So I would have loved to see. I would have actually loved. So you know what I'm going to do? I am probably going to just. I think the footer is actually, let's see. I take this guy off. Absolutely take it off. I just want it to sit at the bottom right there. Let's refresh. So we have the loading show up there, right? So if the absolute footer was actually covering it initially, so loading before it loads the blob, right? So this is simply how you use effects. Um, okay, so of course you can go ahead to perform more styling on the blog, right? Especially within the blog component itself, here the blog card. So maybe just maybe one thing you might want to do right here is to add some additional style. So for example, we might have class name and you might have blogs, right? Or all blogs, whatever you want to call it. I would like to take this guy away, put it above this. Now in React, you must make sure you have one parent component that wraps or one parent element that wraps the other elements. So if you don't want to use a div or main or section, one thing you can do in React is to basically use an empty element that looks like this, right? And this is also valid, okay? So within this, what I'm trying to achieve here is, within these blocks, we can go ahead and, create a style and simply say display grid, right? And grid template columns. I can do repeat, auto fits, main max, maybe 300 px 1FR. So this is just a way for us to have multiple items. Let's see 32 px for gap. So let's see what we actually end up having here. If that works for us, let's refresh this, see what it looks like. Okay, so I don't think that was applied. I said display grids, grid template columns, repeat auto fit, min max 300 px 1FR. So probably, let's see, we probably have to import first. Yeah, correct. So import blocks, or we'll just import the style. So I can say um, assets, CSS, is that correct? Blog.css, okay? I think that is right. And yeah, so we have our blogs rendered this way with that style that we had added earlier. So this is, simply how to, use effects to make API calls. Of course, you can simply wrap your API calls into functions if you don't expect them to load when your application completes loading, right? So this is basically, we're using use effect to actually load an item when our application, completes when our application opens that first screen, right? we want to make sure that that function within the use effect is called alongside the initial screen load. Okay, so that is what we have so far. We have spent 1 hour plus on this call, so I don't want to take too much of our time. I believe most of you might have questions. Someone, okay, let's see. Please, sir, have you written the HTML code for this current program? Does React take care of both HTML and CSS? Well, the HTML code is basically what you saw me write in here, but it's simply JavaScript you're writing. I mean, you just need to understand HTML because you're writing HTML inside JavaScript. Okay, so what you're seeing here is basically the HTML. The rendering you're seeing happening here. For example, this blog items you're seeing here, the title and the description is what you have right here, right? The title, the description, and we have the props, and of course we have the style. So this is the border radius we saw the other time, right? If I make this 10px, of course you get to see this becomes thicker, right? So this is that border you're seeing here. Okay, so we can apply a border radius if we wish to. Okay, and that border radius will then be applied to the border radius here. So if I say border radius, for example, and I set maybe 16px, right? The comma here. So you're going to see that border radius applied right here. Okay, so I hope that does not confuse you, but yeah, I mean we can also take a look at this. Just go ahead and watch this video again. Okay, I am lost, but I don't even know where I got lost. Okay, so I understand. You know what? Just watch this video again, ask your questions in the WhatsApp group or on the Discord server, tag me, I'll definitely respond. Yeah, so let me know if you understand what we've done in this class. Drop your comments, right? Drop your comments, and I want to see. Yeah, please go through the class again. It will be saved on YouTube. Have a wonderful evening, guys. If you have questions, drop them in the chat. Let me see. If you have any comments, drop it in the chat. Let me see. If you have been trying to learn React and you get probably you understand a couple of things better in this session, also let me know in the chat. Okay. All right, so that's a good question. Is there no attendance? Maybe the attendance we shared with you on the WhatsApp group, I believe, right? Or I don't know, maybe let's see, where are the moderators? Okay, I believe the attendance will probably be shared on the WhatsApp group. I mean, it's usually shared on the chat here. I guess for some reasons the moderators are not on the call, right? Okay, so Natasha, thanks for asking. Have a wonderful evening, guys. I'll see you guys next time. Goodbye till tomorrow. Okay.